What's up, everybody? Welcome to another stream on Rule of Two. Today, Marc and I are joined by Stephen Stanton, the voice of Tarkin, and of course, Radis from Rogue One. And he's also involved with a lot of other projects too, not just Star Wars that we're going to talk about. So very excited to have him on the show today. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey guys, thank you for inviting me on the show, and hi to everybody out there that's watching us live. It's glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
No
so
problem.
To start off, there's a couple things that you're working on that we want to plug right away. Go for it, whatever you want to mention.
Well, let's see. There, in the Star Wars universe, there are always things being worked on, but I can't always talk about it. But in the other universes, like in the Disney universe, I've got a new series coming out on Disney Plus called Monsters at Work. It's an animated series that's a sequel to Monsters Incorporated, and the whole thing takes place after the time period where they have to start using laughter. It's almost like the day after they start using laughter instead of screams to power the whole city. And two of the characters I play in there are Smitty and Needleman, who you probably know. They're those two goofball kind of characters.
Yeah.
They're custodians. They kind of do a little bit of everything around the plant, and it's been great fun working on this series with everybody over at Disney Animation, and it's just been a lot of fun. So that's very, very happy to be involved in that. And that's coming out next month.
I can't wait to see that.
What are some of the production differences in terms of how you interact with the crew for a television show versus a motion picture?
You know, it really varies even between television show to television show. Every production does things, has a pipeline and a way of doing things, and everybody has just their way of doing it. So, even though I am doing a television show like The Bad Batch, we don't do it the same way that we do for, like, say, Monsters at Work, which is a whole different group of people, producers, animators. And in film, I would say probably the biggest difference between the TV stuff and the film stuff is that a lot of times in film we're working by ourselves rather than in groups. You're in the studio by yourself rather than with the other actors. That was the way it was, like with Rogue One, where I was doing the voice of Admiral Radis. I was in the studio by myself, with the crew in England directing me, and Matt Wood from Lucasfilm, and Doc King over at Disney, kind of keeping everything. Matt Wood's there to make sure everything continues to sound like Star Wars. And Doc Kane is kind of a legend over at Disney Studios. I worked with him in the past. He's just this incredible sound recordist and engineer. And he kind of, like, when you got something good, needs to be done right, you always have Doc on the board. But yeah, that's one of the ways that it's different between television and motion pictures.
So in Star Wars, I'd love to hear how you got the job of Tarkin. Please take me through the whole story of everything from day one.
Okay, well, let's see. Well, I had already been working on Star Wars: The Clone Wars for a little while prior to getting the role of Tarkin. I had originally been asked to come on board to do the voice of Masameda in the season 2 episode Duchess of Mandalore. So that was way back, like in 2009, I think it was.
Wow.
And there was an audition that came through at a certain point where they were looking for a character that they referred to as the Sergeant. A lot of Lucasfilm auditions are always very secretive. If it has any wordage in the script that sounds like Star Wars, they take it out and they put in sort of generic terms. In this case, they were like generic military terms. But they did say they wanted it to sound like a young Peter Cushing. So I kind of had an idea that this might be the road that they were going down. So I did my best, sort of younger sounding Peter Cushing. Part of what I based it off of was, Peter Cushing was already, later in his career when he did Star Wars. But he had a much longer career, prior to that, doing Hammer films and a lot of television in the UK. And one of the things that I focused on was his portrayal of Sherlock Holmes for the BBC, like around 1969. I think it was a television series. And I thought, this is really kind of like the character, because Tarkin isn't a villain yet. He's just a
Yeah.
very sort of opinionated, kind of power hungry kind of guy that is in the military, and he likes to do things his own way. Like I said, he rubs people the wrong way. He always thinks he's the smartest person in the room. Very much like, you could make an equivalency there between that
Ron.
and Sherlock Holmes. They're kind
Oh
of,
yeah.
kind of think they're the best guy around. So I based it on that, and that was for the Citadel trilogy that was in season 3 of the Clone Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you do these things, especially when you've got original trilogy characters. You think, all right, that's it. It's a one-shot deal. But I was very happy to be brought back, several times in the Clone Wars, especially towards the end, season 5, and then again in Star Wars Rebels, and of course now in the Bad Batch.
Was there a phrase that you took from Peter Cushing in Sherlock Holmes that was kind of like your anchor to try to develop the entire voice and character out of? Because obviously you're not British, but the characters in the show, the English is very convincing, right? Like the dialect of Tarkin is very convincing. Is there a string of words that you latch onto and anchor onto that help you kind of stay in the boundaries of your accent that you're portraying?
Not particularly like from Sherlock Holmes or anything. I have like a master reference reel that I will listen to, from Star Wars: A New Hope, of all his dialogue on that, and that's kind of like my jumping off point. It's like, so what does Peter Cushing sound like? And then I have to make an adjustment and say, like, okay, now how does the version of Peter Cushing that I'm doing for whatever show I'm in, because he changes ages depending on what show that I'm in. How does that change? Part of what's unique about Peter Cushing, and he talks about this in his autobiography, is that the way of speaking that we are, that we know him by, is something that he developed over time. He admits he had a very unsophisticated accent when he was wanting to get into a theater school as a young man, and he says, the head of the school said, "Out, come back when you learn how to talk."
Wow.
And so he sort of, I think he said he befriended like the secretary of the school or whatever, and she gave him some, I don't know if it was some books or notes, and he said he would walk around the local parks, enunciating "how now, brown cow," and all this sort of thing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very sophisticated, very, you're on stage and the audience was here, you all the way in the back, and that sort of thing. And so that was something that he sort of affected over the years, and it became a part of, who he was. But that's why, when I listen to some of his dialogue, someone asked me recently, how do you know when to roll the R's? Well, it's not consistent, because that was a way that he came up with of talking on his own. It wasn't like he grew up in a family and that's how he learned how to speak. It was something he came up with. So, I have to make adjustments based on the dialogue and the age of the character, and like, is he more evil or more friendly? So I make all those kinds of adjustments depending on the show that I'm in, or when I'm portraying it during his lifetime, the character of Tarkin.
So I guess I didn't know that. So I guess now, from Clone Wars to the Bad Batch, you're sort of in between here and, I guess, Rebels.
Let's see.
In terms of aggressiveness and his cadence and his demeanor.
Yeah, this would be the time period where, like in the Citadel trilogy, Tarkin was still picked up a blaster and used it, so he was very physical. Yeah. He wasn't just sitting behind a desk and saying, blow it up or have them killed, whatever. He was still doing some of the dirty work himself, getting his hands dirty. And so now we're kind of a sort of an interim stage. I'm guessing that, the Bad Batch period, I don't know how they're, I can't give away too much, but, the Tarkin novel, if you've ever read that, that is a similar time period where Tarkin he's in charge of building the Deep Space Mobile Battle Station, aka the Death Star. And he is being called back to by Palpatine to link up with Darth Vader, and they're gonna like start working together. And there's clones around and all that sort of thing. So he's still kind of like, he's still coming just out of being a military man, but he's still being expected maybe to get into a battle and command a ship. And so I think this is still the Bad Batch Tarkin is still kind of in that area. He's not Grand Moff Tarkin yet. So he can still probably get out there and cause trouble. Put him behind the behind the wheel of a Star Cruiser or whatever. He could probably do a lot of damage out there in the galaxy.
I always wondered, in that book, I know it explains it briefly, but he suspected that Anakin was Vader and that Sidious was a Sith Lord. I know you can't say anything, but I hope we get to go into a little bit of that with the Bad Batch and see not only the transition of clones to stormtroopers, which is what Tarkin seems to be pushing, but also a little bit of what Anakin and Vader are going through at this point as they're transitioning into, full-on dark side, full-on Darth Vader. And above all, Tarkin's relationship with Vader, I think, would be something super interesting if Lucasfilm ever wants to create a story or touch on that somehow. I'd love to see his relationship with other members of the Empire, especially one as Tarkin.
Well, there's always room for those kinds of stories, whether it's the Bad Batch or something else. I mean, part of what you brought up about him, suspecting that Darth Vader, there's a huge clue for that in the very first Star Wars film, where you got to the scene where Vader opens the scene saying, "He is here." And Tarkin says, "Obi-Wan Kenobi, what makes you think so?" So he didn't say, "Who are you talking about?" Or, so it's because Tarkin has worked with Anakin, and he knows who Anakin. He knows that Anakin is the Padawan of Kenobi, so there's no mystery, there. So if someone says, "Oh, my old master, Obi-Wan Kenobi," well, who must you be talking to?
Exactly.
Unless there was a whole string of Padawans that we don't know about yet that came after Anakin. Maybe there's a series there we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, maybe.
Vader's relationship with Tarkin is very interesting because in the entire saga, that's really the only time besides the Emperor that you ever see him be at all willing to submit to somebody else's opinion, or it seems like Tarkin is his boss, right? Like in the org structure, he's pretty subservient to Tarkin. It's a very interesting relationship in the Star Wars canon between those two.
I agree. I think a lot of that, from the first film, we don't know any of this stuff. We just know Vader's this cool looking bad guy. Now that we've, the picture's been painted for us before and after the original trilogy, we have a much better idea, especially with things like, the books and comics and all that. And, one of the things that I've always felt was true was that, some people have said, well, why would Vader acquiesce, to Tarkin or whatever? But when you look at what happens to Anakin at the end of Revenge of the Sith, where Palpatine really, he breaks him on that table. Like, despite all the medical technology, here you've got this person who's essentially, much more than just a burn victim. He's missing limbs and so forth. And they're putting him back together, he's not in a Bacta tank or anything. He's just like no anesthesia, no pain, nothing to relieve the pain. They're just putting him raw. They're building him and breaking it. Palpatine is breaking his spirit. He's lying to him about what happened to Padme. And so I have a feeling that what you essentially had there was somebody that Palpatine could mold. And so I think, you have the Vader, as villainous as he is a broken spirit. And that's why I think they've got other people that are more powerful than him, psychologically, that control him and kind of get him to do their bidding. I think Tarkin is, taken advantage of that to some degree, and definitely Palpatine has.
Yeah.
One thing that I wanted to ask, kind of take a little bit of a step back, because I'm always fascinated when we have guests on here to ask them this question. When did your kind of Star Wars genesis begin? Like, what are your personal earliest memories of Star Wars, and how did you get into the franchise?
Well, I saw it in 1977 when it came out at the theater as a kid, and that was a time period where there wasn't a lot of good science fiction out there. I grew up watching science fiction on TV, which was mainly reruns of Star Trek and there's Space 1999, Lost in Space, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Anything that came on, my myself, my younger brother, and some of my friends at school, we just ate that stuff up. And we watched those reruns over and over again because that's all there was. And a friend of mine from junior high, he was the president of our local was called the Star Trek Federation of Fans. And they would get together at the community center like once a month, once a week, that kind of stuff, and they would talk about Star Trek. And one of the things that I started doing on my own was after I saw Star Wars in the theater, I really got into Super 8 filmmaking and started making my own model ships and epics.
Oh, that's cool.
On Super 8, getting my friends together, and we had lightsaber fights and aliens and all kinds of stop motion. I was a big fan of like Ray Harryhausen and Phil Tippett, so I was doing a lot of stop motion and those kinds of films. And then the Star Wars exploded onto the scene, and it kind of like changed everything, especially in the sci-fi genre. Battlestar Galactica came out, and John Dykstra and his people, from ILM, they were all doing the visual effects. There was a big lawsuit for that, back in the day. And so I got totally sucked in. I wasn't really sure though that I was going to see it before it came out, because there was I've told the story before. I apologize anybody that's listening that's heard me talk about this. Well, there was a newspaper that came out, when I was a kid. It was called the Weekly Reader or something like that. And they were talking, had all pop culture stuff, and they were talking about this new film coming out, Star Wars, and it's supposed to be about this farm boy who goes to rescue this princess with the help of an old wizard and these two robots. And they had a picture. It's a famous publicity still of two stormtroopers in the Death Star, and they said, these are the robots, R2-D2 and C-3PO. Well, you can't get much more low budget than this. If these are the robots, like I've seen better, I've done better on Super 8 on my own.
Yeah.
But in Florida where I grew up, if a new movie comes out, you're going to go because it's in an air-conditioned theater and you want to get out of heat. So, at the very least, it's like, well, sci-fi, it'll probably be, okay. And then I sat there like everybody else and was completely just awestruck at that opening sequence, with the Star Cruiser coming overhead. And then the other added bonus for me, after everything else that was going along so well in this film, the scene comes on where Peter Cushing walks in. Now, I had been a Peter Cushing fan watching him on TV, in old horror films, but I had never seen him in a new movie at a theater anywhere. So immediately, I still remember the thought that I had in my head. I said, oh my God, this movie is going to be so good, even more so good now that he's in it. I couldn't wait to see what his character was going to be. It just had everything in it for me, So yeah, it had a big influence, as far as me wanting to become a filmmaker and coming to Los Angeles to film school. The films that George Lucas did and Steven Spielberg, those guys, how they changed Hollywood with some of their films, had a big impact on me, because they were the young kids making films that showed that you could do it. You didn't have to be part of the old guard.
We're in Florida.
Tampa.
Oh, okay, cool. I'm in Miami. I'm actually in Miami currently.
Oh, there you go. And you can believe I've never actually been to Miami the whole time I lived in Florida, because we would always vacation outside
I've heard that.
Right? You'd go.
A lot of people from Tampa have never been to Miami. It's like the Buccaneers and the Dolphins are teams from like two different sides of the country or something.
Well, and I've never seen a launch from Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy, because you're always just kind of there. It's on TV, or look up in the sky, there it is.
And I've never been to Florida, so there's that.
Well,
soon
you gotta go. There's always Walt Disney World. You got to check that out.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I gotta ask, what's it like to work with George and Dave Filoni? I'm a big Dave fan, of course, George fan, but what was it like?
Well, from the day-to-day workings, on the Clone Wars, it was, Dave Filoni and his crew would fly down from the San Francisco Bay Area, come to Los Angeles. They would, work with us. George Lucas I never saw him, as far as, coming down. We would get notes, or notes would be given by George from week to week. So you would do like, a session, and then Dave would come back and he'd have some Post-it notes and things like that. Okay, George would like this line a bit differently. And this one, I actually, believe it or not, the very first time I met George Lucas was in 1984 when I was working at the Grauman's Chinese Theater, because he was there with Stephen
nice.
putting his hand in
Cool.
cement, and I was there on hand to help facilitate that whole thing. I was an assistant manager at the theater working my way through film school. So that's right. And I got to talk to him, and I could barely get the words out of my mouth. What we had to do was I had to take a piece of paper up with it, which is official Chinese theater stationery, and I had to ask them both to sign it and put their signatures on it. And I could barely get the words out of my mouth. And my boss came over and said, he wants you to sign that because what happens is the cement would start to settle. So they used to have someone standing by with like a wooden stick, and they'd keep the signature in front of them. If the signature started to settle, and they would like go back over it and trace over it, make sure it, it didn't just get into a bland piece of cement again. And I used to have that piece of paper for a long, long time. I gave it to a friend of mine.
So you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, that you actually facilitated George and Steven Spielberg to sign their Chinese theater cement block. You were part of that.
Yeah, I wasn't there putting their hands and footprint in. I was there kind of like commanding the troops that were there that day. Jack O'Donnell, I think his name was the guy that used to mix the secret recipe of cement. And Jack was always on hand to make sure that everyone's hands and footprints were in there correctly. As a matter of fact, George and Stephen were the very first people to put their sneaker prints in the theater. If you look at the block, you can see where Steven Spielberg slipped and his toes went in, and then he came back out again. Then he put his full footprints in there. So the little mistake is still there. But cool. See, it's funny. I've never seen any live. There was a million photographers and newsreel people there, but I've never seen live action footage of it anywhere. But
I remember seeing it as a kid for some reason, because I actually do remember vividly the whole sneaker thing. Or maybe I just remember that because I've been to the theater and seen that they have their sneaker marks in there. But that's a really cool little anecdote. That's fun.
Yeah. I mean, so that's, so as far as working with those guys, I've never gone. I mean, I have visited Lucasfilm Ranch once, long before Skywalker Ranch, before I worked on Star Wars. I had some friends that worked out there, but I've never gone there to do any work or the screenings or any of that kind of thing. So George Lucas was kind of like in the background as far as my dealings is working on the Clone Wars or Rebels or anything. And in the forefront, Dave Filoni every day.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, he seems like a cool, very down to earth dude. We heard from, I think it was Ashley Eckstein when we were talking to her. She said that George was extremely hands-on with the Clone Wars, which I love to hear, because I didn't actually know how hands-on he was until she kind of explained that he was kind of just nitpicking everything for the show to make sure it was, according to his design, which was very nice to hear. Is Dave something like that too with the Bad Batch and his projects that he's now overseeing? Well,
because if he's, when he's not there, I'm sure because he's this animation, supervisor and creative executive director. He has so many titles now that he holds. He's overseeing so much. I'm sure he has his hand is in everything. Back in the day, he was the point person. So you would have Dave would be there supervising the recording of all the voices, but many times, someone else would be directing the animation of the particular episode. But Dave was still overseeing all of that. And then, of course, while Clone Wars was going on, you had that extra layer of George Lucas. And it's funny because one of the things I tried to get in at we did a series of episodes that ended up being seen as part of the last season of the Clone Wars. Ahsoka's Walkabout was the arc. We did those back originally. We recorded all those back in 2012. And I remember in the first episode, there was a scene that was very much like out of the deleted scene from American Graffiti, where you've got this sleazy car salesman, and he's trying to get Ahsoka Tano to buy this speeder bike, and it's a piece of junk. And up to that point in all of George's his projects, there had always been a mention of THX 1138. So I wanted to throw in a THX reference. So I threw in an ad lib that said, come on, please, the 1138 is a classic. It's never going to go out of style. You can trust
Right.
a piece of junk. And of course, I waited for the next week, and there was no note, to change the line. So I was like, okay,
Oh, sweet.
maybe heard it. Maybe I'm not sure, but it sounds like the line got. But then when they reworked those episodes for what we ended up seeing, this last year, I think it was. That whole sequence was not in there, so unfortunately, that character did not see the light of day. But that happens a lot. We have no control over rewrites, and that arc in particular. Charles Murray was the person that wrote those original scripts. Charles has done, executive producer on Luke Cage and a writer for that, and Sons of Anarchy, and a lot of live action credits. And he had originally written those episodes with the Ahsoka walkabout, with two characters that just trying to think how to say it without giving away. There were she was going to be with two characters that had only been seen in the live action films up to that point. We hadn't seen them in animation. And then they reworked it, and they took one of those characters out, and they put Nick Okami in. And Matthew Yang King came in to do the voice of that. He did a brilliant job. And then I think what happened was, that was 2012. And now we're how many years later now? 8?
Like 11.
Yeah, whatever. How many years?
Yeah.
And then considering everything that has been told in the Star Wars saga since then, story-wise, and I think, who we've seen Ahsoka become, through Star Wars Rebels, where we've seen her more as an adult. And I think they had to go back and look at that and say, like, does that story really work or serve the character the same way it did back in 2012? And they probably said, it doesn't. We need to make some changes. So characters got cut, things got reworked. But, I was still very happy to be a part of that episode, because what was important about that was how Ahsoka got to see how the rest of the lower levels got to see how they perceived the Jedi, and they weren't perceived in a good light at all.
Oh, it was so sweet to see that, because it's something I find that we don't see too much of is the side of the Empire, which is why I'm so intrigued with how we get to see some of Tarkin in the Bad Batch, and showing pushing kind of what he wants, which I assume are orders from the Emperor himself. And also how regular civilians view Jedi, because I feel like Jedi view themselves the way Mace Windu views himself, which is like this prestigious, great stand-up guy, and sees everyone else as a citizen, so to speak. But to see how they actually viewed the Jedi and what they did to, the family of the Martez sisters, and it was neat. I like that perspective.
Yeah.
Jumping towards the Bad Batch. And of course, there's only so much you can give away. With Tarkin's push to have recruits, I guess you can't really answer this. I'll just ask it. Are we going to see the transition between the clones to stormtroopers?
Well, I can't say yes or no, but I think we've got that's kind of what we're trying, what we're thinking might be happening.
Right.
Like the whole idea of civilians coming in, and whether or not they would be better suited. And then of course you have the other sort of like side angle. It's like, yeah, but what if they were commanded by one of these enhanced clones? Maybe that would be even better. Like, that would still. So we're gonna definitely. I think that's a road that I think it's safe to say we're probably going to have to explore to some degree,
right,
because the setup is there. So wouldn't want to throw that away, right?
No, of course not. And I'm very excited to see what the Phase 3 clones are that Kaminoans are trying to.
Kind of in a tangential follow-up to where Theory's going, because I like where Theory's head is at with this. Do you ever kind of have your own personal daydreams, or have heard from Filoni himself about the relationship between Thrawn and Tarkin?
That. Let me just say this. It's funny because Dave Filoni, you probably heard through numerous actors, one of the things that Dave likes to do is to discuss Star Wars, just like you guys like to discuss Star Wars, or everybody in the chat loves discussing Star Wars. Dave Filoni loves to discuss Star Wars. And one of the things that I would do is a lot of times I would have questions on my mind and say, well, what happens with this? And what's the Sith? And Dave would spend 20 minutes, before a session or on a break, and he would explain things like that. I mean, and I've heard all kinds of interesting ideas, whether or not they'll actually be put into place. And I've heard things about relationships between characters, like what you're talking about. But there's a lot of that stuff I can't really elaborate on, because you never know how it's going to be used in the future.
Right.
You really don't want to give anything away, but I do want to let everybody know that's listening, is that those things are discussed on a regular basis. It's like I said, even in the sessions that I'm in, like who gets the lightsaber of someone that's passed away, like how does that get handled? All those kinds of things get addressed. So, and some, like I said, to the point where sometimes the producer has to tap on the glass and say, Dave, we have to start recording this episode.
Right.
As much as everyone is enjoying this, we actually have, we've got some work to do.
Well, that's passion. That's what you want to hear from the guy running the creative on the show, to live in that world and exist in that world 24/7, I think is part of the job requirement. I think it's important. I'm glad to hear that that's how it really is in the sort of minute to minute reality of working on the show, even if it's something as kind of laxed as voiceover recording for animation. I've done a lot of voiceover recording in my career for a bunch of stuff, and it's a different environment. People are holding coffees and they have their croissants and they're hanging out. They're not dressed in a costume, so it is a different vibe, and it's fun to hear that even in that environment, Dave is constantly spinning his kind of creative juices.
Well, he seems like a fan. I really think he's a huge Star Wars fan, and I think that's one reason why his work just shines so bright.
Well, he is. He's admitted, when he got the job, the interview to get the job at Lucasfilm, he's often said he thought his friends at the studio that he was working at were playing a prank on him, because all he did was talk about Star Wars or the Phantom Menace. Like, here, no, give it a break. Let me explain to you why this movie is good. And so, that carries over. I mean, he was, he's very good at keeping the creative fires lit underneath the actors as well, because sometimes we have really busy days. There have been some times where we've had to record 2 episodes back to back, and that's, you're changing gears, you're doing different characters. Everybody's got to, and they have a time limit. It's like everybody has to be out. You're starting at this time. Everybody has to be out X number of hours later. No overtime. It's like it has to get done. So there's a push, for everybody to be on target, to have read their scripts, to know the material, and not treat it too lightly, because that you don't want, just because you're not on the set and because you don't have to be in costume and hit your marks. That's no reason that should not be. You should definitely be familiar with the material, because what happens is during the course of the session, we don't just read the script through and it's like, okay, then we're done.
Sure.
What happens is, Dave Filoni has a very specific way of directing. He will set up a scene for you, like, where is it taking place? Is it indoors? Is it outdoors? What's the atmosphere? And then what he really wants to do is to listen to he wants to hear the actor's interpretation of the scene and how they're going to play it. And then once he hears it, then if he needs to make an adjustment or steer you in a different direction, he'll do that. And then a lot of times what they'll do is, like, if they've got a certain particular viewpoint or take on a scene finished and they want to try something else, then we'll go back to square one, and now we'll try and play it out a completely different way. There was a lot of that going on the Twin Sons episode of Star Wars Rebels.
Oh, wow.
Where I did Ben Kenobi, and Sam Witwer was playing Maul.
Oh, man.
Taylor Gray was Ezra,
Masterful work, by the way, sir. I kind of wanted to save that for last as the final thing.
I didn't know that you did Ben Kenobi.
Yeah. He did
What
Ben Kenobi. And remember, because we had our very first Rule of Two that Nia and I did together, Sam Witwer was the guest. Yeah. And Sam Witwer, that's my favorite episode of Rebels. And it's probably my top 5 favorite in all of the animation canon. It's a masterpiece of an episode. It's called The Twin Sons. And in that episode, Sam Witwer told us that you guys were hanging around in the studio and they were talking about that thing. And then either he said, hey, you should try to do it real quick, or can you do old Ben Kenobi? And you did it, and everybody was like, well, that's perfect. We don't need to do that again.
Yeah, and Sam was like, that's the guy, right? Like that's the one reason. Yeah.
Well,
Right. Now I remember he did say Stephen Stanton. Yes, that's right. Wow. Okay.
The
so
story,
freaking cool.
How that actually came about is what happened is that originally I was working on Star Wars Rebels, and I think I was in the studio working on the episode Double H Droid, which is the one, or our musical episode that has AP5 singing in space, and we have our, Annie, get your gun, kind of anything you can do, I can do better, sort of spoken word exchange. But before, here we are, we're getting ready to do the session, and someone had mentioned that Disney Infinity 3.0 was shutting down, that they were discontinuing it. They were just talking about it as general gossip news, And I said to Dave, oh, Dave, did you know that one of my characters, Meeber Gascon from A Sunny Day in the Void, little Meeber Gascon, I said, did you know that he was in Disney Infinity? And Dave said, no, I didn't. He goes, did you do the voice? And I said, no, I said, the character only speaks in text bubbles. And I said, to be honest, I said, I'm not sure that they knew I was the person that did the voice, but I said, I gladly would have done it because I was already there doing the voice of Ben Kenobi for them. And Dave said, oh, yeah. He goes, that's right. You do Ben Kenobi, because he's known that I've done Ben Kenobi for LucasArts for like Battlefront 2 and Empire at War, back in 2004 and 5 and going way back. That's when one of the very first things I did for Lucasfilm was doing Alec Guinness's Ben Kenobi. So Dave says, yeah, let me hear a little bit of your Ben Kenobi. And I'm like, all right. And then I got nervous and my mind went completely blank and I couldn't think of anything to say. And Vanessa Marshall, who plays Hera, she was next to me. She goes, do the scum and villainy line. Do that line. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. How's it go? And I couldn't think of it. And then I finally, got my thoughts together and said, Moss Isley Spaceport, you'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious. And Dave's like nodding his head and takes his hand off the talkback button and he kind of leans back and he's talking to Henry Gilroy. And I'm looking at Vanessa and I'm like, what in the world was that all about? So we do our session, I get to sing in space as AP5. Everybody hung around for that because we wanted to see how incredibly bizarre that was going to be. And when we were done, everybody was pretty much exiting, and Dave was there with his crew from up north. And he said, I want to talk to you for a couple of minutes. He says, we have an idea for an episode that we're thinking of doing. He goes, this is not a go yet or anything, but he says, we're thinking of putting in the character of older Ben Kenobi, the Alec Guinness version. And he said, we have some ideas about how we actually want to do it, and he told me what those were. And he says, so, like the Jedi, don't get attached. It would probably just be a temporary thing. But if you're interested and want to lay down what they call a scratch track, which is just a temporary track, then they can use that for the timing, for the animation and the previs and all that kind of stuff. He says, if you're interested, he goes, and if we go through with this, he goes, if you're interested, let me know. And if we go through with it, I'll give you a call and see if you want to do it. And I'm like, oh, okay. Sounds interesting. And, up to that point, I had not done any episodes in any Star Wars shows with Sam Witwer together. Our characters never crossed paths. So I thought, two things got me kind of excited about this. I had been doing Ben Kenobi for the games for so long. I said, it'd be nice to do it, even see it as a temp track in animation, even if it gets removed at some point. And it'd be really fun to work with Sam on something because I just had never had that opportunity. And it's like, okay, that'd be great, So a couple weeks go by and I get a call from Dave Filoni and he says, we are going to go ahead with this episode. If you're still interested, we'd like you to, come in and do the voice of Alec Guinness's Ben Kenobi. And I'm like, all right, I'll be there. So he gave me a lot more details about, what was going on with the episode and everything. And so the day of the recording, if you're familiar with that episode, Mark, you know that the rest of the cast is in it, but they kind of bookend
Sure.
the episode. So they brought everybody else in, like Freddie and Vanessa and everybody. They recorded all their stuff first, and then they all left, and then they brought Sam, Ezra, and myself in to record just in the room by ourselves, all alone.
That's cool.
And the way we're the studio that we do those sessions in, I think it's Studio F, I think it is. It's really big. It was enlarged during the Clone Wars so you could put like over a dozen people in there comfortably and record this. So we had this very large studio, and there's just 3 of us in there. And the way we set it up was Taylor was in the middle, and I was over on his left, and Sam was over on his right. So he had like the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other.
Yeah,
and so we had them kind of sandwiched in there. And, much like I was saying before, this is the way Dave directed it. We kind of ran through it and recorded. We recorded the run-throughs, the rehearsal, and then Dave would make adjustments. And we would try things different ways. He would hear lines being spoken out loud, and they would say, maybe. So they would rewrite on the fly. And this particular episode was not only being directed by Dave, he wrote it as well. So he had the writer and the director in there at the same time. So we would say things, and they would rewrite them. There are some scenes that you see in the show that actually had much more dialogue in them than what you ended up seeing as the finished product. Maybe one day they'll play the.
Sam mentioned something like that, and he said, "I can't talk about." Yeah.
They were so it's when you're on the set, it's a work in progress. You've got the thing written down, but then when the actors start playing it out, you start to see like what things work, what doesn't work. Are we telling the audience too much? Should we hold back? There's all the decisions being made, and then so I recorded that, and said goodbye to everybody. Dave and Sam and a couple of other people I think were hanging out, and I kind of left. I'm like, okay, that's it. I guess we're going to see what happens. And then they called me back in, I'm going to say either once or twice more, just to record a few different lines. Dave had me in there one time by myself. We were literally changing one line of dialogue. He said, I have to get this right. This has to be something a Jedi would say. He even joked. He said, maybe I should give George a call and get his opinion on it.
Wow. Can you say the line? What was the line?
It's a powerful episode.
That you have to change. Are you allowed to say?
I will just keep that part of that. For the whole rewrite kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
That's Dave Filoni's story to tell, really. It's
okay.
And hopefully he'll talk about it. But then that's it. You think, okay, that's the last I've heard of it. And then almost a year goes by, and actually before that, here I'll tell you what happened. We were recording another episode of Rebels, and Dave said, he said your Kenobi stuff is really working well because we're stitching it into the whatever they had pre-animated or pre-viz. He said we were in our editing room, and he said people were walking by. He said they stopped and they poked their head in, and they said, well, did you guys find some old unused outtakes from Alec Guiness that you guys are like stealing for this show? It's like, where'd you guys get that stuff? So that was very gratifying to hear that he was saying that people, Lucasfilm were thinking that they had found some old.
Oh, well, when you made that quote, the chat blew up. It was just people were like,
really
goosebumps. Oh my God.
It really is uncanny. I mean, it's such a beautiful thing. And like one question that I want to ask, because I'm such a fan of the Twin Sons episode. It's such a great episode, and you do such an incredible job in that. And so does Taylor, and so does Sam. It's a great episode. I also really love, obviously, James Arnold Taylor's Obi-Wan Kenobi. And you haven't worked on the Clone Wars for so long. Did you and James have a relationship? And after, post facto on the Obi-Wan stuff, did he nudge you and say, hey man, you took my line, or what's some insight into that?
We actually had not worked since the end of the Clone Wars. James and I haven't really seen each other because we never crossed paths in the studio or anything like that. But his Ewan McGregor Obi-Wan is phenomenal, and it was
it's
great.
legendary.
We got to see the hologram of his, juxtaposed against the Ben Kenobi one, so you can see like here's this evolution of the character where he's becoming more of that character we all know on Tatooine. But the thing was, though, even though I had recorded that, and Dave was saying they were cutting that stuff in, there was still no guarantee that they were going to use it because they had these other options that they were playing around with, and there was other actors that they had in mind. So it's like I said, Dave's got a whole backstory he's never really told on this. One day, when we're all old and gray, maybe it'll all come out. But so, nearly almost a year later, getting close to it, we finally get a call from Lucasfilm, and they said, "We just want to let you know that it's Lucasfilm Publicity calling and saying, we want you to know that they used your Obi-Wan for the show, and we're releasing a teaser trailer, and your voice is in it. So we just wanted to get you ready for it. It's like it is you. Get ready for whatever comes your way, whatever that may be." So we're like, "Thanks for the heads up." We had a great chat, and it was thrilling to hear that they ended up using it. And I was not expecting, to go down that road, but after doing the Guinness voice for so many years now, it was just wonderful to actually have an episode where I got to portray him, just like that character that we all know and love.
Yeah, well, excellent work. Bravo to you for that, because that's one of those haunting episodes that I will replay over and over and over again. It's just like Star Wars magic at its best, in my opinion. But nice job on that one.
Would you say that in the end, Maul and Obi-Wan became sort of friends?
I think it was more of an understanding of Obi-Wan really understood where Maul was, that he just couldn't let go. I mean, that's how he managed to take advantage of him in the fight. He knew he was still holding on to all this old rage and all these old memories of everything that Obi-Wan had supposedly done to him to ruin his life, even though there was so much more going on that make Maul miserable. It wasn't just his interactions with Obi-Wan. So that whole sort of scene with him cradling him in his arms at the end, it shows you the compassion that Obi-Wan felt for this character, this being that was just so tortured. And you could see that Obi-Wan didn't want it to go that way. That was not he didn't want to have to kill them all. Didn't want it to go down.
It was such a quick fight, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, it was brilliantly done, and it was we've seen so many of the epic lightsaber battles. I know probably everyone was expecting something along those lines. I think turning the tables on not only the audience as well made that thing what makes it stand out in everybody's minds. Like, it was over so quick. How did what happened? What did I just see? I have to replay this.
Yeah. Sam explained it super well with the different positions that Obi-Wan was going through with the Qui-Gon. Oh, I'm not the Obi-Wan from the Clone Wars. I'm now Ben Kenobi. And it was pretty profound the way he explained it. Where do you think? I just want to get your opinion on this. Where do you think Ewan McGregor will have to dig deep or come to a middle ground for the Obi-Wan that he's about to play? Now 10 years after Revenge of the Sith, because he's no longer Obi-Wan Kenobi of the Clone Wars. He's not Obi-Wan Kenobi or Ben Kenobi from A New Hope. He's now right in the middle. So how do you think what do you think he should be doing?
I think he knows the character probably as well as anybody. He certainly doesn't need advice from me. I'm looking.
What would you like to see?
Whatever he comes up with is fine with me. I'm willing to be surprised. When it comes to this, my expectations, when it comes to Star Wars, is like, I just want to be surprised. I don't want to guess ahead of time or have, thinking about, I wonder if it's going to be this. Because those are the movies that I enjoy the most. Like, when I first saw Star Wars, I didn't have any idea what to expect. I certainly didn't expect what I saw in The Empire Strikes Back. When Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, I had no clue as to what that movie was about. I hadn't even heard of it. There was a standee in the lobby. I just finished seeing the movie Outland with Sean Connery with a friend of mine. Like, this looks good. And he said, yeah, Time Magazine gave it a good review. I'm like, let's go see that one too. Completely blown away. No expectations. Have absolutely no idea. So when it comes to Star Wars, I just want to be surprised, like I am with The Mandalorian and everything else, or Rogue One, another beautiful project be involved with.
It was a really great film. Do you know anything about the? I don't know if you can answer once again about the deleted episodes of the Clone Wars that I would love to see, that were apparently recorded with Daniel Logan going over his killing of Cad Bane, and then possibly will we ever see Son of Dathomir as a standalone sort of series? Because that's something I really want to see in Clone Wars cartoon.
I know the episodes you're talking about. Some friends of mine are involved in that, and I have no idea if that's going to happen or not. That's
damn.
Okay. I have no say in the matter either.
And if you did, you couldn't say anything. Yeah, fair enough. I thought I'd try.
Where do you? We're starting to get close. You've been very generous with your time. We're pushing 50 minutes. Where do you see Star Wars in the next 5 years?
Good. With all the projects that they have going on, I can't even imagine. And like I said, I don't like to second guess or try to imagine.
No expectations. That's good.
No.
That's much healthier.
At the Disney, at the stockholders meeting, and like, oh, there's a lot of cool stuff. And I don't know what it is, and I'm just kind of waiting in anticipation to see, what is it they come up with. They've got some brilliant people working for them, and they're always. I've always been surprised on any of the shows that I've worked on personally, even though I already know some of the characters that I'm doing. And some of the new characters I did were, where there was Moralo Ball or Griff in Star Wars Resistance, the old ex-TIE fighter pilot. There's all these great characters. I never would have thought of them myself. I never would have anticipated them coming into Star Wars. So I'm always, whenever I get an audition, for a new character, I'm always very excited about taking it down a new road that has, I could never imagine, on my own. That's what they excel at. I know, as fans, we all want to see certain things, but I'm always more, kind of surprised when they come up with stuff, especially Dave Filoni and his team, when they come up with things I absolutely never could have guessed would ever even be in Star Wars.
For other folks that are out there, other young folks out there that are working in cinemas across our great country and are dreaming of bigger things and doing creations and being in the position that you're in right now, what kind of advice would you give those folks?
Oh gosh, other than just like keep doing what you're doing. Well, it was much. The resources that you have available to you these days as a creator are vastly bigger, more gigantic than what I had as a kid. When we made a Super 8 film, like, well, where would we show it? You get your friends together or your family, or you can get a church group or a school or something. Like, we're always making excuses, my friends, to do a school project. And can we do a film instead of writing a report? That way we could work on our filming school, film skills and so forth. So, if you work at a theater, first off, you're already working at a film school because you're getting to watch movies for free on a regular basis. So you should watch as many of them as you can. And then, get out there and just start making your stuff, put it up on YouTube and Vimeo. It's like, there's no excuse nowadays not to get your stuff out in front of the public eye. Anybody can do it, so long as you have a camera and you get your friends together. Actually, we're working with a young guy right now. He's an aspiring screenwriter. We just had a meeting with him last night, and we're telling him kind of the same things. It's like, he did really well in high school, putting together film, in his film class, and now he wants to go beyond that. And it's like, yeah, do it. There's nothing to stop you right now except for your own unwillingness, I guess, to move forward. Don't get stuck. One of the things that I enjoyed while I worked at any theater was just being able to see the kinds of movies that I ordinarily would not pay money to go see. The stuff that I had to break out of the genre that I really loved, science fiction and horror and fantasy. But I wouldn't go necessarily see a drama, like A Passage to India or something like that. It wouldn't be something that I would make an effort to go see, because I think, oh, I might not like that kind of thing, So when you got all this stuff available to you now, with everything that's going on with streaming, we've got so much available to us. There's a lot to educate yourself with.
Yeah,
That's true. I like that you're kind of in film school whenever you watch a movie. So I guess I have a master's at this point, because that's all I like to do is just watch films.
So when does your project come out? When does the Monster sequel come out?
Well, Monsters at Work, that premieres on July 2nd on Disney Plus. And
okay, cool.
If, let's see, I can't really say too much more about it other than I have. But as far as other new things that I'm working on, I do a lot of work for the Disney theme parks as well, and the Avengers Campus just opened up the other day. And I don't think I can say yet. I can't say what I did on that, but it's an extension of something that was from one of the other parks in another part of the world. So it's something I've been working on with Walt Disney Imagineering for quite some time. So I've got that. And right now, if you're any of the people that in your audience, if they like Looney Tunes, I'm doing some for Warner Brothers as well. I just did a couple. Pete Puma was a character that we brought back, and I've got some new ones that we're working on with another classic Looney Tunes character. They haven't announced those yet, so I'm really looking forward to everybody seeing those too. All this stuff that you grew up with, and now all of a sudden you're working on it. It's nuts. And I did want to mention one thing, especially because of the lockdown and everything. So a while back, I did an audio book of Treasure Island, and we put it up on YouTube for free for students, especially advanced placement English and other classes that use that book as as an assignment. And it exploded. The viewers it was doing well already, but during the pandemic and the lockdown, it just exploded. Everyone was just using that. And so if there's anybody out in the audience that has been assigned that book for your class, there is on my YouTube channel, you can find the entire, all 34 chapters. There's no commercials. You don't have to pay for anything. It's all free. And I do all the voices in it. And you may actually hear some voices that kind of sound familiar to you. Some of the British ones. But anyway,
I'm gonna put I found it. I'm gonna put the link to chapter 1 of 34 in the description right now.
Yeah, I haven't visited that book in a long time, but it's a good one. It's a fun one. It's a really fun one.
It is a lot of high end, as we say.
Yeah, cool. Well, look, for me, thank you guys, and thank you to all the people watching the dual stream on StarWarsTheory.com. It was fun over there, and Theory. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Stephen Stanton.
Stephen, before you go, can I bug you to say one thing? You may fire when ready.
Oh, of course. You may fire when ready.
We got it. There you go, chat.
So subtle.
Hope you're happy.
So subtle. So I love it. It's just perfect.
It's beautiful, man.
That for me is Tarkin. He seems like very confident but bored at the same time. Like he's
everything's beneath me kind of thing.
Yeah. He's above every order he gives. It's really well done, sir.
And also I've linked it now down below in the description if you guys want to go check out Steve's Treasure Island, part 1 of 34. Just refresh the stream. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you
so much, guys.
Good night.
It was great. It was a pleasure finally getting to meet both of you here in this virtual space. So,
a dream of mine would be to have you and the cast of the Clone Wars and Dave Filoni here for a sort of a charity stream or something like that. And all the money that people donated in today's stream will go to a charity of your choice. What would you like to choose?
For me?
Yeah.
Starlight Children's Foundation. We've had a long
Starlight Children's Foundation. Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. So anyway, you guys, may the force be with you always.
May the force be with you, Master. Thanks, everyone.
Later.